My name's Chris Ying. I'm the editor-in-chief of a silly food magazine called Lucky Peach. Among the things that my job is good for, or one of the only things it's good for, is getting to eat at lots of restaurants that I otherwise would not be able to. I think in the last year, since meeting Christopher, I've had the pleasure of eating at Meadowwood 5 times or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
Too many times for him. And I've eaten at a number of, fine dining restaurants around the world, and certain trends start to kind of appear to you once you've eaten at a number of 2 or 3 Michelin-star restaurants, and you start to see that 2-star Michelin restaurants are kind of where a lot of the innovative, exciting stuff is happening, and 3 Michelin-star restaurants are where luxury and kind of over-the-top eating happens, and you're just kind of pampered. And so when I went to eat at Meadowwood for the very first time, I thought, okay, well, this is going to be another one of those situations where I'm going to have to loosen my belt toward the end of the meal and just feel really uncomfortable. And I was just struck eating at Meadowwood. Of all the restaurants I've eaten, it was this really exciting, innovative place where cooking was happening that spoke to a specific place and time and felt relevant. And it was set in this place that was really luxurious and beautiful, but it didn't feel stodgy in the way that a 3 Michelin-star restaurant was. And by the way, Meadowwood is a 3 Michelin-star restaurant. So anyway, I got to know Christopher a little bit more and found him to be one of these guys who is at the very forefront of cooking in the world today, just pushing things forward and speaking to his specific place, where Meadowwood is, which is in the Napa Valley. So with that all in mind, here we are today in Mountain View, which is something of a little bit of a homecoming for you. Can you give us a little bit about, can you explain what the hell I'm talking about?
Sure. Thanks for coming, everyone. Thank you. My first chef job was actually at Chez TJ, which is on Villa Street in Mountain View. It has been there for 28 years, 29 years, I think. Same owner, same paint on the walls, same lamps. So this, I moved to Mountain View after having lived in San Francisco. I was the sous chef at Campton Place for Daniel Hum. And I wanted, my first chef job in Mountain View, having never been to Mountain View or still anywhere near here. It seemed close enough to the city. I think that was my thinking. And I came and I lived in what is more or less a double-wide trailer behind the restaurant, which is where all the chefs lived throughout their time at the restaurant. Spent 2 years there. We had some degree of success, and moved on to Meadowood. I'm actually coming back to do a dinner on Monday, this coming Monday, like a dinner surrounding the book at Chez TJ, which should be a lot of fun.
What brought you to California or Northern California originally?
I went to college in New York, Hamilton College. We don't produce a lot of engineers. It's all poets and finance. And I had some idea that I wanted to be in California, having visited, and I had a roommate who was from San Diego, and those of you that know the area where Hamilton is, like the center of New York State, and it's like this meteorological bizarro world where there's no sun ever. It's really odd. So I just wanted to go somewhere that was sunny. It was sunny, and I wanted to go to California, and I wanted to be a chef. That was like the general ideas that I had. So I ended up in San Diego, living on the beach, cooking, and eventually found my way up to San Francisco.
And at Hamilton, you studied philosophy.
Yeah.
Not a lot of chefs start their careers by going to college to study philosophy. And it's interesting, I was thinking about it being here at Google too. A lot of people who are in this industry, in the tech industry, don't necessarily study engineering or study anything that pertains to a company where they end up working. But in the book, you talk a little bit about how your different background informs the way you cook or helps you. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think I should say, when it's written that I studied philosophy, I was terrible at it. So I don't want people thinking like I could have been this acclaimed writer of philosophy and instead chose to cook. I don't think that was an option. I think that, is there a reverb, or am I just hearing that in my ear?
It's definitely something.
Okay. Philosophy, like cooking, when you study philosophy in an academic setting, you're sort of learning what other people said. You're studying those things, and then maybe with the end goal in mind of maybe sort of distilling those things through the lens of your own life and creating an original idea. I think that's sort of the idea. And cooking is very much like that. You come up in different kitchens and you learn all these different techniques, you learn flavor profiles, you learn skill sets. But in the end, it's up to you after a certain period of time to take all of that information and create something that's uniquely your own. And that takes a long time. That's sort of the challenge with young cooks now is they watch a lot of TV where everyone's a chef and they think that people want to create their food, as they say. But really, that's the last step of the whole thing. It's about acquiring the skill set. So I think the parallel is that eventually if you study well enough, if you learn enough things, and if you're honest enough with yourself, you can maybe one day sort of articulate your own vision.
So the book is called A New Napa Cuisine. For those of us who are not familiar with the old Napa Cuisine or what came before, can you explain what you're trying to achieve, what a new Napa Cuisine is?
Sure. I mean, I think I'm very careful to recognize the fact that there's a lot of great chefs who have already cooked in the Napa Valley well before I ever got there, before I was born, frankly. So it's not to say that I'm the first guy to roll into the Napa Valley and cook nice food, because that's obviously not the case. But I think we make the parallel in the book between architecture as an example, where in the Napa Valley, it was sort of the arrival of the wine industry and the wealth that followed it. Had sort of a hodgepodge of architectural styles. There was like Spanish Revival, and there was a lot of Tuscan, and there was suburban McMansion looking. There was all this stuff. And as the valley sort of slowed down and sort of started to maybe curate something specific to it in an architectural sense, people specifically like Howard Backen, who's sort of a renowned architect of the area, the valley started to create this sort of more singular architectural style that had references to, the valley's agrarian past, had a very sort of minimalist aesthetic. It was something that is now sort of a Napa Valley architectural style. So I'm in looking at food in the same way. There was always nice food. Trevigny did great Italian food for 15 years, and the French Laundry does great food that's of a French bend. And there was places like Cindy's that were sort of very Americana. There was good food, but I don't know if there was necessarily the ambition, the desire, or the wherewithal to create a kind of cooking that really sprang from the place. And as we outline in the book, that really details those sort of 4 operating principles, which are the use of agriculture as a jumping off point, and we do that by operating our own gardens, was sort of a nod to the valley's sort of agricultural past. It's using the Materia Prima of the valley, if it's the grains that are milled nearby, if it's our use of the bees and the honey and all of those things, the olive oil, all that is found within the valley. There's the artisans, which is a big part of what we do, which is the curation and commissioning of our plates made in the Napa Valley for the restaurant. And then
the Materia.
Did I say Materia Prima? Growers, artisans.
Foraging.
Thank you, Jesus Christ. And then there's the wilds, which is utilizing the wild elements of the valley, the foraging, the mushrooms, the wild sorrels, all of those things. So really using those things that really, most of which were really untouched in a culinary sense, harnessing those things and sort of starting to write sort of a new chapter in the Napa's culinary history.
This idea you're talking about of cooking food, of having a restaurant that's specifically of a place that's very much tied to the artisans and the wilds and the Materia Prima, is that something that you brought with you when you came to Meadowwood, or is it something that you learned when you arrived?
I think that a lot of those words, local and specificity of place, those are definitely currents in the food world. I wasn't the first guy to be like, I want to cook food from here. And maybe I was the first guy to actually choose that particular here, but there were people, I think, and there have been for a long time, sort of acting as proponents of that idea. But when I got there, I certainly had no idea that was the direction I want to take. And as we talk about in the book, there were sort of a lot of aha moments when you start to realize that Napa has a very thin veneer, meaning there's this assumption that it is a certain kind of place, and it is. It's a place where there's money and wealth and wine and tourists and all these things. But that veneer is very thin, and below that is a lot of historical and cultural depth and a lot of, again, opportunities to sort of pursue something unique. So I think it was in my first couple of years there that I started to notice these things. If it was wild things growing, if it was like gaining a small understanding of the valley's history and meeting artists, it was sort of a slow development. And I really think it sort of came into focus a few years ago, and that was what sort of inspired the book.
So I mean, like you said, no one had really thought that Napa Valley was one of these places with a heritage that could be unearthed from, the surface that we all kind of know. And the same goes with, Copenhagen with Noma, or Sao Paulo and Alex Atala. So is this idea of, uncovering what's beneath the veneer, like something that can be translatable to anywhere? Can you do it in Mountain View? Can you do it?
I think so. It's just, it's important to not make it as overly academic process. You have to cook food well. You have to have nice products. You need to cook it well. Otherwise, it's sort of, I don't know what you said. It's just sort of an intellectual exercise and has no value food has to taste good. So that's the jumping off point. So yeah, you could apply it to a lot of different things, but and a lot of people, frankly, are in very sort of forced, contrived ways trying to do that. But in the end, again, it's about being able to cook well and pleasing people. Everything else, I think, has to follow from that.
And so you have these 4 tenets that you talked about, and you talk about in the book, which are the garden operations and the artisans, the wilds of Napa, and the Materia Prima, the local earth and product. So maybe we can go through each of these a little bit and talk about them. Can you describe the garden operations at Meadowwood?
Sure. When I got there was a small garden that was sort of connected to the property, which we use quite a bit, and we still use somewhat. There's fruit trees and figs and apples and quince and pears, and we still use that quite a bit. But we sort of outgrew it and developed a partnership with the local Montessori school, which is just on the other side of the Silverado Trail, about a quarter mile from the restaurant. And we sort of joined forces with the school. We utilized their land. We have, hoop houses, and we grow on about 2 acres over there. I work with the kids, and we do community lunches up in the restaurant. Sort of this, it's as much an agricultural effort as is sort of a community outreach. And that has really proven to be the sort of the beating heart of our creative process. And we have a woman in place there, Christine, who is like the world's greatest gardener, frankly, and we work very closely with her in terms of what are we planting, when's it coming, and we've really gotten to a point, we've gotten fairly good at it over the past couple of years. We're maybe on a good month, maybe 70% of what we're using from a vegetable point of view is coming from the garden.
That's pretty incredible. I mean, I don't know that people really understand, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
I actually wanted to back up just a second. How many people here have been to Meadowwood? Okay, so I'll just give a brief on what this restaurant is like for the rest of you. It is sort of tucked away on a sprawling resort that's just, one of those places that's impossible not to love being. Eating at Meadowwood is this really holistic experience. You don't accidentally show up at Meadowwood. You go out of your way to get there. You stay where you eat. So, if you drink, you will drink, and then you will be wheeled by one of Meadowwood's capable staff into your room and deposited into your bed.
On the ground.
Onto the ground. It's not a full service thing. It's a tradition it's part of this tradition, Meadowwood is, that not a lot of people are familiar with and not a lot of us have experienced in our lifetime. And you talk in the book about wanting to be a part of this tradition, wanting to be a destination restaurant. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I always liked the idea, even when I was in Mountain View, something about not having casual diners. Like, you wanted people to come who really wanted to eat that food. Not you didn't want them to struggle to get there per se, but you wanted it to be a deliberate act. And I think that enables one as a chef a lot more freedom in sort of determining maybe what they do. And having worked in Europe a lot, I like that idea of these restaurants and properties sort of set away from everything else, because there's this transformative separation that happens when even if you're driving from the city and you're driving through Napa, but you're already relaxed. You drive on this beautiful property. It's something of an escape and therefore a much more immersive experience than if you just pull up with a taxi and walk in the front door of a restaurant. And there's something, you feel that very much in the restaurant when you're in the room. People are incredibly happy to be there, and that makes our job a lot easier, and it makes for a much more enjoyable experience. So that was always something I liked, and that idea of, we talk about in the book, they had like that aubergiste mentality of like, you're on the front steps of your place sweeping and people are journeying to you. I like that a lot.
And you guys have become a part of this local community of St. Helena, nearby St. Helena. I've walked down the street with you and your family, and you just get stopped by everyone.
Yeah,
They're just like,
it's nice.
hey, you owe me $5.
Exactly. Exactly.
So let's get back to the garden a little bit. You were just saying that when things are really clicking, you can take up to 70% of the vegetables in the restaurant. So how do you and your cooks interact with the garden? Does the garden sort of inform what you cook? Are you telling the gardener, I need 4 carrots to come out of the ground today?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, when we're determining what we're going to plant, it's like we want to try this, we want to do this year, this. But then you forget, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, there's carrots coming tomorrow. So there's a little bit of that, but there's also, we know that this is in the ground. So from a systemic point of view, on a day-to-day basis, we order from the garden. We know what's coming. Christine sends out these order lists. We order what we need. So there's the part of it where the kitchen informs the garden, says plant this, but to a much greater degree, it's, hey, this is coming up. And limits and restraints very much, for us, very much fuel creativity. It's a lot harder to create good food when you have every ingredient at your disposal. For me, it's a lot easier when it's like, hey, we have kohlrabi coming.
As you guys flip through these books, you'll see a lot of the dishes at Meadowwood. The platings specifically are very much focused or feature the vegetable, feature like the herb and the fruit and the vegetable as like this beautiful, precious commodity, and kind of highlights them over the more expensive, over this caviar or the foie gras or whatever. Is this something that you've always emphasized vegetables, or is it something that having a garden has increased in you?
I think once you understand the process as a chef, you realize how much harder it is to grow that carrot than it is to order some caviar from the caviar guy, and that's why we don't shave truffles tableside. We're trying to get these porcinis just right so we can shave the porcini tableside that were foraged by our guy. That it's a way of showing what we value. Luxury is great. I love truffles. I like caviar, but for me, that just doesn't have the same degree of value as that thing that not just that you planted and you grew, but you created the garden and hired the people and worked with the school and tilled the earth. And it's like, and you get this little carrot as a result. Not to mention that they taste pretty good.
One of the things that I've always loved eating at the restaurant and noticed is sometimes those ingredients like the caviar, the truffle are literally hidden underneath vegetables. You don't even know they're there until you eat it. And I'm kind of like, don't you want to show off your Lamborghini?
Some people would rather us show it off more, I'm not going to lie.
Do you have a hard time ever sort of with guests? Meadowwood's not a cheap restaurant, in case anybody had any ideas that it was a cheap Tuesday night place or anything.
But Google said they would subsidize actually all of your dinner.
If you all look under your seats,
cool.
there's a free dinner for everybody.
Like
with an emphasis.
Exactly, yeah.
I've always wondered this of Meadowwood and of other sort of top tier restaurants today. Do you ever have to have that conversation with a diner to justify the price when you have a very vegetable focused menu? And not to say that's a vegetarian.
Right. It does happen, but I think it happens the same percentage as it happens anywhere when people don't get their steak. So it's not a big problem that we have, and it's about how you tell the story. It's not about preaching to someone saying, no, you don't understand. This carrot took my blood, sweat. You don't say that, Ideally, you weave a tale, a certain narrative that, sort of embraces, it sort of engages the diner in what you're doing, and they're as excited about it as you are. If you have to lecture your guests so they understand the value of things, you're doing your job terribly. And if you're making things taste delicious, I really feel, especially at that price point, the diners are so sophisticated and are frequent those places enough that they're equally pleased to have something that's delicious and different and special.
And that is totally the experience of Meadowood. Is you feel things are stimulating and interesting, but never challenging to the point of displeasure.
Right,
You're not trying to.
And
fight with
when you
anybody.
eat at a lot of these restaurants that are, on the certain lists and are these well-known places, you'll have dishes that taste like shit, right? Would you agree with that?
Sure.
You have dishes that don't taste good. So, that's sort of the thing that we have to wrestle with is everything has to taste good. We are trying to be the tip of the sword in terms of pushing things forward, in terms of being a little cutting edge, but there's no room for failure. The end result can't be a failure. What the guest sees can't be a failure. So, and maybe that's the difference between 2 and 3 stars. And that's maybe why what we do is so odd in that the twos can make some mistakes, but they're also pushing really hard. We're pushing really hard, but we have no net below us, and that's pretty challenging.
Right. But I think that sorry, not to argue about how great your restaurant is and prove to you that it's great, is that I've always kind of, I've felt oftentimes that, at a 3-Michelin-star restaurant, there are certain things they're obligated to do for you. At the end of the meal, you have to have some, after you've eaten tons of stuff, you've got to have some tchotchkes, and you've got to end with like a big fat piece of dry aged steak that you don't possibly want. And I never felt sort of like there were any gestures at Meadowwood that you felt obliged to do.
Right. Yeah.
And which is the most impressive part about Meadowwood, is that you're able to not give those things necessarily, and yet maintain the 3 stars.
I mean, maybe one day Michelin will say, "Wait, you're not giving away tchotchkes." but that goes to the way we look at it. Is like we are going to go in the direction we think is best. And I keep thinking of the tchotchke thing. A lot of 3-star restaurants, you finish dinner, they give you like all this stuff, cookies for the next day and all this stuff. And I just don't. I like the idea of you leave your meal with just the memories of it, and it's a nice feeling, and you don't find stale cookies on your counter the next day, But that's one of those things I don't want to say it's a trap, but that's one of those things that we consciously don't do. And so maybe we'll be one of those 2-star restaurants one day.
Another thing that you guys don't do is you don't serve all of your food on sort of the same fine porcelain white china. And which brings us kind of into another section of the book, which is the artisans. So could you tell us a little bit about the plates?
Sure. That's another thing that's very trendy, and I think it's actually a great trend within the industry, is sort of the use of ceramics. I think it's sort of rightfully, if you sort of start studying the history of ceramics and the role of ceramics in restaurants and in dining, you really start to see how silly it is sometimes when you're curating food so specifically to then go buy a plate from someone and put all these things that you made onto a plate that you just bought. There's a bit of a disconnect there. So, the artisan project began with a couple different artisans in the valley, all of whom we still use, and is now sort of culminated in this new partnership that I'm doing with a ceramicist named Richard Carter, who's in Pope Valley, which is the Napa County. He's just on the other side of the mountain. And if you read the book, that's actually where we shot all the food. And with the exception of the chapter that deals with the plates, all the food is actually shot on surfaces from this gentleman's this 19th century homestead. The thinking was the way a band sort of will go, Dylan and the band used to go to Woodstock and record in the basement of the house there. And bands will retire to certain studios and places to record, and the feeling of that place bleeds into the music. That was our thinking with the book. So we shot the food not on plates, but on all the kiln shelves from his wood-fired kilns, and on the glass and the wood and all the very sort of tactile surfaces that you find there. So part and parcel of that is we're actually launching a new plate line, me and him, and it's this collaboration that's kind of now reaching this point if we ever get it done. But I've really found that to do what we want to do and to make each dish sort of a self-contained idea, And maybe one reason we're able to get away with the stuff we get away with is because it feels like you're being told a very big story, and the reason it feels as such is because each thing you're given is like a little sentence or a little chapter, So without the vessels that fit the food, it's a lot harder to do that. We do a dish now, it's like a pork collar, acorn miso that we make, and it sits on a plate that's like burnt orange, and the whole dish, it looks like fall. Like, it's beautiful, it makes sense, it touches all the bases that we touch, and it's a totally self-contained idea. That dish would not be impactful if we put it on something we bought. And that's the sort of goal in the distance, is to really, really, really make that point really well. And that's an expensive and painstaking process to really develop pieces of clay that fit the food that you're thinking of in your mind, and have those two things come to fruition at the same time. That's really, really challenging. But the goal is after throughout the meal, you're stunned by the overall beauty of what's being put in front of you.
There's a line in the book that I really, really liked in sort of talking about that luxury aspect and this idea of a new kind of luxury at Meadowwood, and that was when you said that specificity costs money. Right. And it kind of flies in the face of most other business models in this day and age, where it's kind of like you've got to provide everything to everyone,
Right.
and then show them ads, or sorry,
Right.
guys, but and
I didn't
and
say
make money that way.
I did not say that.
But
I like ads. I think ads are great.
it is very. All of the plates at Meadowwood have a tiny little ad
Yeah,
on them.
exactly.
But I just noted that that's an interesting way to look at it. That what they're paying for is not necessarily. Just you sourcing out the most expensive thing of everything.
And I think that's more and more valuable and relevant as we, as a society, we become more and more build your own Starbucks coffee. I did a talk the other day with the head of R&D of Starbucks, and she's like, we have 180,000 possible combinations. Who wants 180,000? Like, who really needs that? So there's something nice about, you sit in our room, we got you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we got you. We have put so much thought into that potato, because I don't want you to. I just want you to appreciate it maybe, but definitely enjoy it.
And at Meadowwood, the reservationist will speak about dietary restrictions, but when you sit down at the table, there's no menu.
No menu, yeah.
You're just kind of strapped in for the ride.
The thinking was, it's not about taking control away. It's that I don't want you to look at a menu and be like, okay, I'm getting chicken next, and then I'm getting this next. It's that makes it impossible for it to be a really immersive experience. We want there to be surprise, and we want to be able to play with the guests. And it's not like, okay, I've got 3 more courses, one of which is beef.
So the next section in the book is about the wilds, and you talk in the introduction about this section, sort of thinking that this trend of foraging and finding ingredients out in the world was not really for you. It wasn't really, you thought it was a trend. But then you tell a great story that involves a certain character named Charlie. If you could maybe communicate.
Charlie is a dog. He's a half German Shepherd. This is my wife Martina over here. It's our dog, and a lot of these sort of aha moments that we talked about. We used to live in we were still dating, in a house that backed up into this estuary that runs to the river, and I used to take Charlie there as a puppy, and he used to run around, and that's when you notice that there's pea growing. There's wild plums. You see eucalyptus. There's these huge oaks and all of the acorns. There's all this stuff just growing there. And it was very sort of Willy Wonka-like, where everything's edible. That was sort of the connection. That's when I still think a lot of foraging is silly, and people think that just because it's hard, they went out in the morning and got it doesn't mean it tastes good. I think there's a lot of that. But we found what we want and what we look for and what we get, and I think that we talk about for me the importance of the historical connection to the place. We still find mortar stones along the river that are mortar rocks when the Indians would grind acorns, or we still pick the same blackberry bushes that people did, hundreds of years ago, or use Indian paintbrush, or the mustard flowers that bloom in the spring. There's something, it tastes good, and that's the most important. But that addition of meaning and value, and the amount of depth that can lend to the story as a whole is really, really powerful. And sometimes you have to, go find that stuff.
I have a couple of questions about that idea. Just underneath our noses in St. Helena and Napa Valley are these rocks that Wapo Indians would use to grind acorns, and there's whole levels of stories underneath what we see now. So, could you tell us a little bit about how it is you came to know this history, and what is the difference between the Napa that we all see when we go wine tasting for the weekend and what's underneath?
There's these really good books by, his name escapes me. One's called Napa, Far Side of Eden, James Conaway. And these are really modern history. How did the wine industry start? And his next book is called, I can't remember, but it's about what happened in the 90s, Silicon Valley, the sort of the first dot-com boom, what that did to the valley, the influx of wealth. So really, then you start to say, okay, this is why things are the way they are. This is why there's a wine train. This is why there's all this stuff. And then you start kind of looking back and understanding what the role of prohibition was, what the cash crops were before there were grapes, why the CIA is this huge monastery-looking building, why you start to learn all these things. And I would go to the Historical Society. We still work with the Historical Society. My staff has to go take historical tours of the town and all this stuff. And for me, I'm just sort of a nerd about that stuff, and I like it. But it also, not just in terms of cooking where you are from, but also living there, I think that provides a certain depth of importance.
Short of assigning homework to your diners before they come in to eat,
yes.
Is there a way for you to
Google?
Do you think diners would benefit? Do you think they would enjoy the meal more if they, understood that you took this walk on this trail that used to be, et cetera, et cetera?
Some yes, some no. But it can't. The success of the dinner can't be contingent upon their understanding of it.
And so the last section of the book is divided into is the Materia Prima, and it kind of also speaks to, the very bones of Napa. Can you explain that idea?
That's probably the hardest part because, wine growing land in the Napa Valley can fetch $250,000 to $500,000, meaning there's not a lot of small farms because there's a lot more money in grapes than there is in chickens. So for us, that's been our biggest struggle is finding people who produce things of high quality protein, really protein wise. And when we have to make a decision between something that's local and shitty and something that's not local and good, we're going to have to get what's not local and good. So that's been a challenge. We've now found someone who raises pigs for us, someone who raises guinea hen, but that search is really challenging. And sometimes it takes working with the people to help them. Like we have this walnut oil from Rancho Chumiles, which is this old Spanish land grant, and this lovely woman and her husband who I know, they've sort of revived the walnut orchard. They make this really nice walnut. But I had, sometimes you have to help a little bit, maybe create other customers for them so it's a financially viable system. And that concept of what is sustainable. Sustainable, there's also economic sustainability. And in order to make some of these things possible, you have to create that. So using the mill in town, their stones aren't that sharp. So I might need to help put them in touch with someone who sharpens millstones. And it seems like a lot of work to get flour, but in the end, the flour is really good and you've done good things for a lot of people.
Like most of us food nerds in California, you talk in the beginning when you couldn't really afford to buy cookbooks, one of your first cookbooks being the Chez Panisse Cafe cookbook, and anybody who is again California food fatty, our education begins with Chez Panisse and is kind of tied to this idea of California cuisine. Where does Meadowood lie in the sort of narrative of California cuisine?
I think there's a lot of chefs in California who are in that tradition. I mean, they're all in that tradition. I think what maybe sets Meadowood apart, maybe again, is that idea of operating at that old school hospitality, ideally perfect execution sort of world, while still remaining true to those tenets. Because it's easy to remain true to those tenets when you're just like, hey, we got green beans. Hey, we can saute them up with some bacon. I used what's in the garden. That's, while super honorable, is kind of easy. When it's like, hey, we've got green beans, there's 70 people coming for a $400 pop dinner, what are you going to do with it? So I don't mean to imply that we're doing California cuisine, but we're not doing it better. We're just making it really hard on ourselves. I guess that's it.
It is something kind of a new idea that took Northern Californians specifically a long time to catch up with. Was, yes, California cuisine is a great and beautiful philosophy and important to the overall advancement of American cooking, but we shouldn't just stop at that point.
Yes.
It's great that everyone can serve those green beans. It would also be great if there were restaurants that did something else with those green beans. Yeah. Whatever you
I think your very good friend had made a comment.
Yeah, some figs or something.
Yeah, that's funny.
You mentioned just a minute ago, like the influx of money during the first .com boom, and sort of in the book you talk about there's certain laws in Napa that kind of prevent you from having businesses, it's protecting agriculture and things like that. What are some of the sort of central, like what makes Napa Valley an interesting place to work and run a restaurant?
I mean, you're in it. What really is an agrarian setting, which has incredible value in terms of creating food that's of a terroir, and you're an hour and 50 minutes from the most sophisticated city in America. That's a very rare thing. You have people who are already coming there, people of means. You have a bit of a captive audience, and now it used to be a seasonal audience. Now Napa is literally a year-round destination for a lot of people. People who by nature of their coming there obviously appreciate food and wine. That's a pretty good situation to be in, provided you're doing the right kind of work and capturing those people.
Toward the end of the book, you have a really sort of beautiful final essay talking about this idea of the new Napa cuisine and your commitment to this area and being a steward of it and advancing these ideas and taking your own part in this long history. How do these ideas spread beyond Meadowood? Do you think that your cooks will go and stay in the Napa Valley? Like, how do you intend for this to play out in the next 10, 15, 20, 30
I think
years?
some of them will. I mean, the biggest challenge to your earlier point is there's not a lot of restaurant spaces in Napa Valley. I mean, there's some, but it suffers from the same problem that San Francisco does for young cooks and young entrepreneurs. Is just the cost of living being what it is, the cost of opening a restaurant in Napa being what it is. But I already see that sort of happening, and it'll be one or two. It'll be, it'll take time. But I do see that happening, and I don't see. And what I think will be interesting in both what I'm going to do and what the next generation will do or the next cooks will do is it'll be at all sorts of different price points. I mean, there's a lot of sort of restaurant concept-y things that we want to do that all fit within the ethos of what we talk about in the book that are totally different. And again, I feel like every time we find a new product or find a new way of using kind of what's around us, I genuinely think we help a lot of people when we do it, provided we're doing it responsibly. The walnut oil is an example, or the mill, or whatever it is. So I think when you're doing good things for people, people support you. And I think that we have a lot of goodwill in our community for what we do, which I think affords us the opportunity to do to build a lot of businesses, both myself and my team.
I have reached the end of my pieces of
you
paper
did a really
here.
good job, though.
Which means maybe it's somebody else's turn if anybody has any questions to ask Mr. Kostow.
What's your favorite restaurant in wine country? Basically, where should I eat next? I've already been to your restaurant.
It's really
It changes seasonally.
Yeah,
you can return
I'm
again.
sure it's different. I come. Where do we go for dinner? We have a little one, so we don't eat out as much as we used to. I like Redwood. I think they're doing nice pizzas and stuff at Redwood in Napa. Cook is nice in St. Helena. It's kind of cute and fun.
Speaking of little ones, can you get them to eat any of your food?
She eats well. She eats a lot of tofu, a lot of eggs, a lot of pasta. She like freaks out over pasta, but it's not like I'm not making the pasta by hand from the flour ground from the grains at the mill with the old guy in period attire, Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Just throw it on
I
the
don't know.
ground.
There's only so many hours in the day, but she eats well. She eats very well. That's an important thing.
So, okay, this one's about how do you go about finding staff and training your staff to kind of embody the same tenets that you have, and making sure that's conveyed to to all the diners, and
Right.
kind of keeping that the level consistent.
Right. I mean, if I believe it and I'm enthused about it, all I have to do is communicate about it consistently and effectively. In terms of finding people, we're a bit immunized from the sort of the staffing challenges that right now are endemic in restaurants, in the Bay Area specifically, because of sort of the accolades of the restaurant. We have tons and tons and tons of applicants, but we also don't really have any turnover. I mean, how many? This Coleman's one of said staff. I mean, this year in the kitchen, how many people quit? 0, right?
He's going to take this opportunity to.
Chef, I've been meaning to talk to you. I think we don't have the turnover that restaurants do, and we don't have the turnover that restaurants, like high-end restaurants, tend to have. So, like we have a thing called TRAMU, the restaurant at Meadowood University, where like it's going to the Historical Society, it's going to the Sturgeon Ranch, it's going foraging. They go to wineries. They are immersed. It's hard because everyone's so busy, but we try to immerse everybody in what we're doing.
All right, I'd like to thank Chris for coming, and we could give him I'll give him a round of applause. Thank you very much.